When Governor Brad Little signed House Bill 71 into law last April, he wrote in his transmittal letter, one of the few he wrote to explain why he did what he did, while recognizing society has a role in protecting minors. However, Governor Little wrote, as policymakers, we should take great caution whenever we consider allowing the government to interfere with loving parents and their decisions about what is best for their children. House Bill 71, also known as the Vulnerable Child Protection Act, would make it illegal for a doctor to prescribe hormone therapies, puberty blockers, or perform any gender-altering surgery on any child who identifies as transgender. Well, that law now seems a bit vulnerable since a lawsuit was filed by two Idaho families back in June claiming it violates the equal protections provided by the 14th Amendment. See the interfering with loving parents and their decisions about what is best for their kids written by the governor as he went ahead and signed it, that part. Then in July, those plaintiffs asked the court to grant a preliminary injunction on that law to keep it from going into effect January 1st, which was yesterday. And a week ago, well, that's exactly what happened. Federal Judge Lynn Windmill put the enforcement of that law on pause while the lawsuit works its way through the courts. An appeal was immediately filed by State Attorney General Raul Labrador, of course. In his decision, Judge Windmill said this was the purpose of the 14th Amendment, to protect disfavored minorities and preserve our fundamental rights from legislative overreach. Disfavored minorities like newly freed slaves of the 19th century, interracial couples and women of the 20th century, and transgender children and their parents in the 21st century. Well, this day after Christmas ruling was quite the present for some Idaho families dealing with gender-affirming care for their kids. Like the doctors we've learned have left the Gem State since Idaho's abortion ban went into effect. We now know of 3 families with transgender kids that have or plan to move out of Idaho, not willing to leave that decision in the hands of a judge. Andrew Bartline has been in touch with some of these families, and while this is usually when we get to hear their side of the story, we've also learned some of these families, Andrew, they're just tired and don't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, it can be exhausting for those families, right? And you can think about those kids as well. Again, these are minors, kids under 18 years old. So that piece with that, it can be emotionally draining for those kids. That's what we've been told today by many different families. And then what they say, fighting the government on top of all of it, it takes a toll on them. And that law wasn't supposed to take place until 2024 to create time for families to wean their kids off blockers and hormones. If they were on them, they'd then be illegal. But instead of preparing for life in Idaho without medication, an advocate for these families says that they're actually planning for a life without Idaho. It took 2 legislative sessions, but Idaho lawmakers passed the bill.
For these families, it's been absolutely terrifying.
That's because the Vulnerable Child Protection Act would partially block a decade of work built by Jen Blair.
To be scared, like everyone's excited for New Year's, except this little group of us who are talking all the time about like this dreaded day, this January 1st that's coming.
Blair founded Mama Dragon, an organization dedicated to advocating for LGBTQ+ moms and families. It comes from personal experience.
Like I knew gay people existed somewhere in some seedy back alley corner, perhaps, but not in healthy, vibrant, supportive Christian Republican families.
Not in her Christian Republican family, right?
I needed information when my kid came out, and I didn't know anything. There was nobody providing that information.
She filled the void for the next family, but couldn't plug the cavity. Now, a temporary pause on the state banning gender-affirming treatment for minors only makes for equally long relief.
I don't know a single family with trans kids in the state that doesn't have an exit plan to become a medical refugee, to flee to get their kids the care that they need. It's a terrifying thing to think that your government has created a hostile medical environment for your kid.
The 208 confirmed 2 families already left the state because of this law. A third's on the way out too.
Why would we allow them in this tender state of mind that is under 18 to make decisions on having their bodily parts, healthy bodily organs removed?
Republican Representative Bruce Scoggs sponsored the bill. He says delaying the law until 2024 gave families time to ease their kids off soon-to-be illegal hormones and blockers.
No.
You don't know anyone who was planning on that?
No, 0 people, and I know dozens of trans people in the state.
Do you know of any family in the state who has a child who's a minor? Yeah, you're 14, 15, 16, let's go do the surgery.
Well, first of all, you can't. It's impossible. There's no care here.
But are people seeking that out that you know of?
No, and particularly not in Idaho. Pretty much have to head to Pocatello to find a doctor who can even talk to you about hormones, or head to Boise to get care.
Who showed up today?
Care she considers vital
It's a hard space to sit in.
because she's seen the worst.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of funerals for kids who couldn't take it anymore. So that's the fear.
If you're going to these funerals, I imagine you knew them personally.
Yeah.
It's a concern already addressed a year ago on the State House floor.
Best way to reduce suicides in children is to give them traditional talk therapy, counseling, and care as they go through puberty and these confusing times of life.
Through a pause in the law, it's become a confusing time for the whole family.
These are children who have become pawns in this political war.
A stalemate on the front lines has one side retreating outside Idaho's lines.
I don't know how to help Idahoans understand who they're hurting without risking the safety of these vulnerable families.
The Idaho Attorney General's office is appealing the preliminary injunction. They use the word immediately when they sent out a statement about this. And the AG's statement says the judge made a mistake, and pausing or striking down this new law would create what they call irreversible harm. The AG statement, Brian, likened this gender-affirming care to forced sterilization. I believe the state, long time ago, right? Like
1925 had a
mental
eugenics law.
disabilities.
Had a eugenics law on the books.
Eugenics is another word they use, and he also points to Europe, so some European countries, and we've heard a lot of Republicans say this nationally. I have personally, saying that European countries have already shut this down and they're not doing it. We should follow suit and do the same.
The words that he used have been largely rejected even in many European countries. But we looked into this, and thanks to Politico, they kind of looked into it as well. The UK, they've closed a clinic in London, but they plan to open other clinics. So this idea that they're closing these things down and stopping this from happening in Europe isn't exactly true. France, new guidelines from the French National Academy of Medicine warning a risk of overdiagnosis is real and urge care in evaluating kids. Well, French doctors say that offering transgender care has not been minimized because of that. They are not impeding access. Sweden, Norway, pretty much the same thing. No access has been limited in any of these countries up to this point. They're just saying maybe we should just take a look at this and consider what we're looking at when it comes to kids.
A finer tooth comb is kind of how I understood that report.
Exactly. And so to use Europe as an example of people that are banning this and rejecting it, that's not exactly true. You spoke to a transgender family this afternoon. I've spoken with one before, and I want to share this with you as well as with you, Andrew, that they are here, right? But they're very grateful for the pause. I want to read this to you that she sent to me. The timing worked really well for us. She's due for a puberty blocker shot next week. It happens every 89 days. She said St. Luke's is where they were going. They were referring people out of state to get the care for the pediatric patients, but they tried to get this care in Seattle, but they couldn't get on the schedule in time for that shot, and they'd have to pay for the travel to get there. So she says to me, we try not to get too excited or too worried since we know the fight is not over yet. But now they can get that shot with a doctor that's familiar to them to have it happening. And I talked to St. Luke's about this as well. For the time being. St. Luke's does not have a policy directing referrals for gender-affirming care. Rather, they refer to a specific location for families or patients that want to seek elsewhere, treatment elsewhere. They can seek care out of state, can choose that location and that provider if they so choose. It also means that St. Luke's providers can continue to provide this type of service, at least for the time being, as you mentioned, and they will continue to do that. As they said, they'll keep a close eye on further court proceedings. We will continue to be a welcoming place for all, for practice all forms of health care within the bounds of the law.
Not a position I envy.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrew.